Howdy Smyth Performance Beetle Ute builders. New video today about sunroof drains. There are plenty of videos, both I and Mark Smith at Smyth Performance have some other videos out there that are addressing the sunroof drains, but I've gotten so many questions and realized that it's buried in amongst other stuff in a video that covers a bunch of things. So this video is purely addressing sunroof drains. The exception to that is we have to talk about the roof cut because that changes how you address sunroof drains. So we're going to cover the roof cut and my preferred technique for the roof cut, and then we're going to zoom in on sunroof drains and where I route it and what I use and different places to get the stuff to do your sunroof drains. For the actual drain piece, there's really three options that I'm aware of. The first being use your factory sunroof drain. So this is the little plastic piece that attaches to the hose, factory in the car. So what you can do is take that piece, trim it down to look something like this. So you can just glue it back in the channel and use that. You could even trim a little bit more off here. You can take that clip off. You can take this clip off. You could cut this right across here. Just ensure that you don't mess up the integrity of this drain area and put a hole somewhere else. You can see it's got a nice little ramp so that the water will come up and come out the tube. The drawback to this is that this piece sticks straight back. So if you use this drain, it's going to stick out further, which means you got to cut more off and move it forward, which means the sunroof won't open as far. Okay, maybe not a big deal, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not a sunroof fan. It's just another thing to leak. Problem is, these Beetles all have sunroofs. It's actually really hard to find one that doesn't have a sunroof. So, option one is the factory plug. Option two, which I'm sorry I don't have an example here, is Mr. Chris, K-R-I-S-S, Chris Motors, has hung on his website, has the 3D printing for one very similar to this, but the important difference is this nozzle or this tubing attachment point comes out at a 90 degree, which is the whole point in trying to make this be able to sit as far back as possible to maximize the sunroof opening. All right, so that's an important piece. His design is very similar with this triangle shape. So I used a couple of his on a couple different cars, and they work great. They're fantastic, but I wanted to get rid of this point and get this coming out at an angle earlier. So I worked with a friend of mine that has a 3D printer, and he printed me up something like this. So this is the second to last design, and this is straight off the printer, so it's not cleaned up. This needs to be sanded a little bit here so that the tubing will clamp on there real nice and there won't be any leaks there. And I got to run this out. No big deal, but that's what it looks like. He prints in whatever color he has extra of to save a couple bucks. So he had a whole bunch of orange that he wasn't using, and it doesn't matter, you can't see it, but sometimes they come in black or white or whatever color. So don't be thrown off by the fact that this one is orange. The latest design, which is actually what's in here, and we'll zoom in a little bit, is this same drain, but it's cut at a 45 across here. So that gives us just this extra, about a ½ inch of clearance for this little waterfall piece that's on the sunroof that I'll show you when we zoom in here. Okay, so those are the three different pieces that you can find. The factory one, you can use a factory tube on there or a factory size tube and just put it right on there. I have cut these off right here, drilled it out, and put a ½ inch 90 into it. Right, so well, I grabbed the wrong one. So if you grab the factory one, cut it off somewhere here, drill it out a little bit, and you can put a little plastic fitting in there. And that way your hose is pointing the right way sooner. Problem I've run into using this is with the hose sticking back this way, and you push that rear window surround in, it kinks the hose, and now it's not working like a drain. So be careful of that if you come out of this straight. There's no pressure on this drain, so it's got to be watertight, but it doesn't have to be able to withstand pressure. So drilling out and sliding this in there and gluing it in, you can use sealant, silicone. There's a whole bunch of different things you can use, and it's not critical as long as you seal it. All right, so that's kind of another variation of options. So in this one here, I have these drains with that 45 cut on the front. Can't really see it because it's already glued in, but we're going to zoom in here. I'm going to take the camera off the stand, and we're going to go through roof cut measurements and how I do the roof cut, and then we'll talk about how that applies to where that sunroof drain ends up sitting, and then how I route that drain out. So here we are looking down on the top of the car. Roof cut here from Smyth Performance. The dimensions are 3 inches from the back edge of the door. All right, so this back corner right here, you want to come back 3 inches. Now, because of the curve and the angles and everything, you got to be careful coming across here. But the advantage on a sunroof car is that works out to be 12 inches from the back edge of the sunroof opening. Right, not the window itself, but that opening, 12 inches back. So you can get your mark done with tape or Sharpie or whatever you're using. You could scribe it a bunch of different ways. So my technique is get that mark done. Then I add 2 inches. So I'm going 14 from the back edge of the sunroof opening, and I'm going 5 inches from the back of the door. And I do a full cut. That's my first cut that I actually make into the roof. I'm not worried about how clean it is because I'm going to cut a little bit more, and it's really not critical. Whether you use a skill saw with a metal blade, you use a cutoff wheel, you use a jigsaw, which I recommend against, but it'll work, or a sawzall, that cut is not critical. Makes it easy to pick up that piece and get it out of the car, and you're not worried about the cut. Okay, so 2 inches back, and that's just to get stuff out of the way. The next cut I make is this roof cut, only going through this roof skin at the 12 inches behind the sunroof opening and 3 inches behind the door, and then continue it all the way across this channel. So that all comes off at the spec cut. But I'd be careful not to cut into this piece, which is kind of a roof brace that's underneath the skin, right? The black is just the skin of the roof, and this is a brace that's underneath. So I get that cut. My personal technique is using a shears. It's the little 3-bladed thing that, but you could do it with a cutoff wheel. You can do it with a metal blade and a sawzall set very shallow, and put a couple of spacers in between here to lift this skin up a little bit. Don't force it too much, or you'll stretch it and then you'll have dimples to deal with. But a couple of small wedges in there will help. However you decide to cut it, that cut is done. Then I'll come back and trim this piece, right, this gray metal that you're looking at here. I'll trim that back 1.25 inches longer than that roof. And for reference, you can see that there's kind of a tray here with this little lip. 1.25 inches from that edge to here ends up just as that little lip comes up. All right, so you could go a little bit shorter, and that's fine. That won't hurt anything. I like to keep that little lip. It just helps me keep the adhesive in place as I am assembling the rear window surround, getting the rear window surround installed. Now, this is where it gets a little bit trickier. Hard to see because I have this glued in, but here is the edge of the sunroof rail. So that's the actual aluminum track that the sunroof runs in, and then of course this outside piece here is the drain tray. That I leave a 1/2 inch longer than this. All right, so this is 1.25 inches. So this is 1 3/4 from that edge. Now you can go 1/2 inch from this edge, or you can measure 1 3/4 from that edge. It's kind of hard. This is not a bad reference here. This little tab that sticks in. It's kind of hard getting references to get good measurements. And remember, you can always come back and cut more off. All right, so when you think you have your cuts all made, then you can trial fit the rear window surround and make sure it seats all the way forward where it's supposed to go. All right, and if you need to, you can trim a little more off. Technique there, most of you guys will probably figure this out. If it won't quite go all the way in, you measure the distance from where you need it to be to where it is, and then trim that amount off whatever it's hitting. Whether it's hitting in the curve up here, sometimes this, like you can see, there's just a little bit of a high point there. I had to take that down just a little bit because the rear window surround was catching on that inside the curve before it would sit all the way in. Or maybe these rails are a little bit too long. Okay, so you get your cut made, and then you're ready to start addressing this. As you can see, this is the actual sunroof here, and I have it by hand opened all the way up. Usually when I start cutting on a car, I just take the battery out so it doesn't go dead because I'm leaving doors open or what have you. And when you're working with electrical, it's always good to have power off. So you have to move the sunroof by hand. No big deal. It's a 4mm Allen. There's a little crank that comes in the car, but I prefer to just use a socket on my big ratchet. All right, so the sunroof is all the way at its back, and this is the point that I'm worried about hitting the rear window surround. So that's what I'm paying attention to when I'm figuring out all these dimensions. Now you could see after I made those cuts, I had to trim a little bit out here and underneath. So that was my 1 3/4 cut. Then I had to notch this a little bit so that this nozzle would be able to stick out to the side, because the idea is to get the water flowing out to the side as close to the back as you can to maximize your sunroof opening. All right, to prevent your sunroof from pushing on the rear window surround once you get it installed, I just put a little set screw right in the very back edge here. So as the sunroof motor, like when the car is operational, is getting pushed back, that will hit that little screw and it'll stop it from actually putting any pressure on your rear window surround and screwing up your beautiful bodywork. So don't forget to put that set screw in so that you don't mess up your rear window surround. Then you glue in your whatever blocks you're using, right? I just smear some adhesive all the way across it. Did a good coat of adhesive all the way around. Stick it in the channel, glue it down, and if you checked your clearance on this against the rear window surround, then you know wherever you put this, as long as it's behind that edge, you're clear. Now the trick is that when you mush that in with a clamp or whatever you do to hold it, you aren't able to see it, but you got to reach in there with your finger and make sure that this lower edge where the water is going to trickle into the drain does not have a big bead of adhesive in front of it. So once you get that clamped in there, reach in with your finger and make sure that that's clear, or wipe it out so that you get good drainage. Really isn't a big deal, and I'm sure you'd figure that out on your own. Part of the reason that we do this step cut is so then you can put this bolt in, right? You have to drill a hole. One side has a hole already drilled, the other side does not, and I just put a bolt through there to support this framework of the sunroof right back here at the edge, so that sunroof is very well supported and you'll have zero issues with it. So I just put a little bolt right through there, holds it all together, golden. All right, if you cut it off at the 3 inches, right, there is nothing here to bolt them together to give that sunroof a little bit of support in the back. I don't think it's a huge deal, but it won't hurt anything to give it a little more support. Now the reason that I am going with the new design has a 45 cut on this back edge is this piece right here. So this is actually part of the drain tray. So when the sunroof is closed and water that seeps through the rear seal, the water drains into this tray that goes all the way across and comes down into this channel that then will drain out the car. So that piece will hit on the standard length for how I've trimmed. So by putting the 45 on there, you get just a little more clearance. Now you could cut a little bit of the kind of that drip guide at the bottom, but don't cut it back too far because you don't want water trickling over that edge and then splashing into the wrong channel. You want to make sure it gets into this channel, not this channel. This channel will just drain inside the car, which is a bad thing. So that's why we did that extra clearance. So as you're setting this up, check that you have that clearance and that this is not going to push this drain out, and then it'll push on your rear window surround. Plus it'll then be loose, won't be sealed, and you'll get water in the car. So now that we have the water collected properly into this channel coming into the drain, I put a 7/16 vinyl hose on it. If you use these, you can take it with you to Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace, True Value, wherever, or even Amazon or wherever you get your hose to check the size. I like to undersize it a little bit. You'll notice that this is undersized a little bit, and I just put a touch of heat on it, and that helps hold it on. All right, vinyl hose. You could use whatever hose you like. I like the vinyl hose because it's inexpensive and it's very easy to work with. The challenge of it is that it kinks fairly easily, and if it's kinked, then it won't drain. So as you're routing it, you got to make sure that it doesn't kink. If you use the reinforced hose, it's less likely to kink, but it's also harder to get worked up into the channel where you want to route it. I've also heard of folks using PEX, and you can heat that up a little bit and contour it and make it go exactly where you want. Again, if you heat it up and start bending it, be very careful that you don't mold a kink into it. All right, lots of options for tubing. This is what I've been using, and it works pretty well for me, with the caution of make sure you don't kink it. All right, so that's the upper end. Now we got this water coming out here. What are we going to do with the other end? My preferred technique is a Shark Bite 90. This is a 1/2 inch Shark Bite 90. All right, it's just plastic. They're inexpensive, and you get 5 in a pack, and you really only need 2. You may have something laying around. You can use brass barb fittings. There's plenty of different things you can use, but this works out pretty well for me, and they're inexpensive. I put one of those onto this the bottom end of the hose. Again, you can see I've heated it up a little bit and forced it into the tubing. It's actually a little bit smaller tubing, but however you want to approach it. So from the inside of the car, we're going to route that hose in here along the B pillar, and when we put the B pillar support on, it'll help cover that, or I'm sorry, the B pillar cover, right? And then we're going to run it back here in this back corner, and it's going to come all the way down to these body plugs that are already in the car. So you can see this hole here. I've pulled the body plug out. This car had a little bit of a flooding problem, so I had to do some clearing here anyway. Then all I do is punch a hole into this body plug and push this 1/2 inch tubing in it. So that 90 makes it lay at a nice angle instead of having it come straight up and then the carpet kinks it over. So, because I'm going to put the carpet back in here, right? And it's going to lay on top of this, and you'll never even know this is here unless you go look for it. So that will lay up in this corner. A little bit hard to show you one-handed. You got to make sure you get the length of the hose just right. By the way, this vinyl hose usually comes in 10-foot lengths, and I find it's about 4 feet and 8 inches that I use on each side, so a 10-foot length gets me both sides. So that's how I route the drain out. Now, I've seen plenty of guys run it differently. I can't speak to how well that works. I like this plan because it's easy for me to get at this and clean it if necessary, or if I'm finding a little bit of water, I can troubleshoot it by peeling the carpet up and taking the B-pillar covers out, and I can see that hose and see if there's something in it, see if it's full of water, if it's got a kink or what have you. With this drain hanging out underneath the car, you do periodically have to check and make sure that mud daubers haven't built a nest or something, but it's pretty easy to access if that's sticking out through the bottom of the car here from reaching underneath. It's pretty easy to clear that. I have seen guys route that hose down the B-pillar, so basically the same that I'm describing, down here all the way down on the inside, and then come back and join whatever drain system they put in under the bed. That's another option. My personal opinion on that is I could never get to that again to troubleshoot it, or it would be challenging to get to it, so that's part of the reason I stick with this plan. It's up to you on your build how you want to do it, obviously, but that's where I'm at with this, and that's how I'm running the sunroof drains. So recap, cut to 12 inches behind the sunroof as per the directions, 1.25 inches longer, 1.75 inches longer on the sunroof trays. Don't forget your set screw so that the sunroof gets limited. Obviously, these dimensions I'm giving you are assuming you have a 90 that's flush here, because if you have put this drain in, you have a little bit more space issues, so you're going to have to cut all this shorter to give you room to bring that hose out and make the sideward angle. So you'll have to adjust your dimensions if you don't use a 90 here. Run the hose down, B-pillar under the B-pillar cover, down out through the body plug with a 90 degree. And that's it. It's actually much simpler than, it'll take you less time to actually do this than this video has taken, I believe. So this technique will give you almost 12 inches of sunroof movement, which gives you about 9 inches opening. So all this work just to get another inch or two, but if your sunroof only opens 7 inches, that's really not even worth having. So that extra 1.5 inches, 2 inches that you gain by doing this double cut really goes a long way for having the sunroof be useful. While I was talking, I forgot to mention, all right, I'm going to put the links to contact Kyle to get a set of these if you want, or you can download the form from chrismotors.com, K-R-I-S-S. I'll put that right down here. You can download the file and then send it to one of the online printing places, and they send them to you. I think Kyle is charging $30 for a pair of these shipped. The Chris Motors, he has offered that to that file for free, but it's probably going to cost you about $40 to get them printed and shipped to you from one of the online printing services. If you have your own printer, you could email Kyle and see if he'll send you this, or you can use the one off Chris Motors. Hope you all do well on your builds. I hope you're able to put it together watertight. It's never really watertight. Remember that sunroof has to leak. It's in the design. Same as with our bed, right? Our bed floor has to be able to bring water through. So it's not so much that it's leaking, but it has to be able to flow water. So you need to channel it where you want it to go. I hope you're able to get it together the way you like and you have a dry interior. Good luck. More videos coming as always. I'm always thinking of another little tip or something. Comments, better suggestions, questions, ideas, whatever, put them down in the comments. I'll try to get to them. You all take care. Be good to each other.